pressing than ever, demonstrating the need for Europeans to come together to ensure Europe's security and autonomy. We are honored to open this afternoon debates and be joined by Mrs. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Andrius Kubilius, Commissioner for Defense and Space, and Mr. Ruben Brekelmans, Minister of Defense of the Netherlands. Without further ado, I have the honor of inviting Mrs. Kallas to take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you here interested in space. A week ago, I spoke to a room full of defense experts. I underlined how urgent it is that Europe gets serious about security and defense. But I didn't mention space. And if some of you were watching or noticed this, I hope I can put you at ease now. Because space is as contested a domain as land, sea, air, or cyber. Today, it is even more complex than during the last decade of Cold War. We are already the targets of hybrid warfare, including in space, with systematic jamming of satellite navigation signals of GPS or Galileo. This causes major disruptions, making even planes to land. There are risks to our satellites, the ground infrastructure, and our space industries from kinetic, electronic, and high-energy weapons. Espionage is a constant threat. And there is now a specter of nuclear weapons on the orbit. This is why space threats have now reached the UN Security Council. On the eve of its full-scale war in Ukraine, Russia tested an anti-satellite missile and launched a cyber attack on space system. Given just how much we rely on services in space, we should expect nothing less. Our space applications serve civilization from precision farming to the safety of our sporting events. They serve our military missions on the ground, verify non-proliferation, and help countries to manage crises. In modern warfare, space provides our eyes in the sky, enabling real-time surveillance and precision drone strikes. Space-based Earth observation has been a game changer for the Ukrainian military to resist Russian attacks. The previous head of the US Air Force recently predicted that by 2050, almost all military operations could take place in space. Although I have to mention here that there were also people who said that next war will be a cyber war. Well, we see it's not like this entirely. The EU has to promote a safe and secure space environment and the peaceful use of outer space as global commons. At the same time, we have got to get serious about our defense in space as well. When we defend space, we are defending our economies. The security of our satellites is the security of our societies. And it is in every EU member state's interest that we address these challenges together. This is what we committed to do in the EU Strategic Compass for Security and Defense and the Space Strategy for Security and Defense. It will be also reflected in the upcoming white paper on the future of defense and in the preparedness strategy. To defend ourselves in space, we are now developing a new European space shield. There are three priorities here. One, it is imperative that we have a near real-time awareness of who is doing what in space that could possibly pose a threat. The EU already has classified annual analysis of the threat landscape. These are nourished by intelligence from member states. We also cooperate closely with the national space commands who provide regular information on real-time threats in orbit. We need to do this more regularly. Second, how do we really respond to such attack? There are three elements here. First, attribution. Second, retaliation. And third, mutual defense. For attribution, identifying the actor responsible for an attack, we can do this by increasing our understanding of the malign actors and sharing intelligence. On retaliation, we are looking into punitive options in the same vein as for cyber attacks. This is very new itself. In December last year, we applied sanctions following hybrid attacks for the first time, including a covert unit within the Russian military intelligence agency that carried out cyber attacks. And we need to think about how we can best apply this to space as well. And on mutual defense, we have Article 42.7 of the Treaty of the European Union. This applies if member state is a victim of armed aggression on its territory. The other member states have an obligation of an aid and assistance by all means of their power. This could also apply to an attack in space or against space infrastructure, for example. And the third priority is to work more closely together internally, bilaterally, but also multilaterally. Within the European Union, most of our member states are using space services, but aren't operating them individually. Some are much stronger than others, but no member state can really afford to do any of this alone. The EU needs a stronger security culture across governmental and private actors. Information exchange is key. This helps to build our defenses and improve our systems. Bilaterally, the United States and the EU are most important security partners on the ground. We must be allies in space too. Space is clearly on the domestic US agenda. President Trump said he wants to plant the stars and stripes on Mars. On security, we have to work together. We both have strategic rivals, and we have to work in tandem to prevent a conflict in outer space. Because conflict here would condemn our future by making vital orbits unusable for decades. We must also cooperate with other partners, including Australia, Republic of Korea, and Japan. We already coordinate our diplomatic positions, exchange information about threats. We should also coordinate responses with these countries if there is a need. On a multilateral level, the EU works with NATO and the United Nations. NATO is the main guarantor of the security of most of our member states. But it is the EU and not NATO that owns and operates space assets, so we must support each other here. This is what we are doing by working together on issues from the resilience of satellites to educating our workforce for the future of space. And we are committed to working with NATO to respond to threats also in space. This is a really need for both of us. On the United Nations, it is a key forum for our space diplomacy. It is the only international forum where globally binding norms can be set. And it is the forum where this diplomatic work should continue. The EU Special Envoy for Space is leading this work, working not only with partners, but with non-aligned states too. The vast majority of non-aligned states are not spacefaring nations. Most of them depend on space as much as we do. But they are not always realizing this, realizing the consequences of a collapse of space services. It is essential for us all that space does not remain an unregulated domain. This is why we will continue our work to set norms of responsible behavior in space. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had the race to space. Now we have the race in space. There are more than 10,000 active satellites in orbit. The traffic alone and risk of collisions are challenges in themselves. And there is so much debris, and we are looking now about what could happen if we can't launch anything anymore. Astronauts on the International Space Station have already had to postpone spacewalks and maneuver the station multiple times due to debris. And now there's a race to dominate space. In this area of competition, cooperation is more important than ever. We must share intelligence among member states. The bad guys share information and the good guys should as well. We have to work with the like-minded partners to protect space services and ensure the infrastructure is resilient and protected. And we must champion the rules-based international order together with our allies across the globe. There is a real risk of space becoming the Wild West where only the toughest survive. We cannot let this happen. Together, we are always much stronger and much safer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kallas, for your strong and clear messages. I have now the honor of inviting on stage Mr. Ruben Brekelmans, the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands, a nation who's obviously an example in European cooperation. Mr. Brekelmans, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. High Representative, Ms. Kallas, Commissioner, Mr. Kubilius, colleagues, partners in policy, business and science. We are nearing 3 years of Russia's large-scale war of aggression in Ukraine. From the beginning, we realized this war was a turning point in history, an era-defining turning point that would affect us all and would direct our attention eastward on a daily basis. But if we look upward, beyond the Kármán line, we see many turning points as well. Even before the large-scale invasion of Ukraine, in November 2021, Russia used a ground-based missile to destroy one of its satellites. The resulting space debris caused the International Space Station to change its orbit in order to prevent it from colliding with the debris. Coincidentally, our first Dutch defense satellite, called BRIC-2, which had been launched 5 months earlier, crossed right through the cloud of debris. Luckily, it came out unharmed. In space, we saw more examples of maskirovka, or Russian military deception, soon enough. Spoofing, jamming, accidental explosions, and collisions. We can get a preview of what is to come by learning from history and by learning from what is happening today in other domains, for example, in the maritime domain. In the year 1609, the Dutchman Hugo the Great formulated the highly influential principle of mare liberum to express that the seas should be freely accessible to all. We see nowadays how this principle is under pressure. Russia and others are abusing these principles for sabotage of critical undersea infrastructure. Allow me to offer a Latin equivalent for space. Spatium liberum. The free and responsible use of the space domain. We can easily see how we would like to adhere to this principle while our adversaries increasingly violate this. Within the EU, we are currently not living in war, but we are not living in peace either. This is the reality. We are living in a gray zone in between war and peace. And in this gray zone, space is a perfect place for geopolitical threats. We can't afford to be naive about this, because our adversaries are gearing up their offensive space capabilities. Space is the last domain in which we need to take a giant leap to strengthen our military capabilities, to reinforce our deterrence, and to increase our resilience. Over the past 10 years, the United States has undertaken hundreds of satellite launches, followed by China, also numbering in the hundreds. Then Russia, with just over half of that number. And at the bottom of the list, there is Europe, with less than 100 satellite launches in those 10 years. And if we want to launch a satellite from Europe, it would take us significantly more time than the countries that I just mentioned. These are all disturbing facts. And it is particularly disturbing since we are highly dependent on space for a modern way of life. From paying our bills to navigating to the nearest hospital. And the same is true for our safety and security. We need space for crucial input on situational awareness, targeting, and communication. And any UAV we aim to deploy in a crisis situation is useless without satellite navigation. Also in Ukraine, we see how innovation and collaboration in space are essential. It is one of the reasons why Putin still hasn't won a war that he thought would be over in only 3 days. Some estimations assert that half of all Ukraine's military intelligence is derived from space. But we shouldn't wait for a war on our doorsteps before we strengthen our security and our resilience in space. We need to move faster and more decisive together. And in that respect, it is positive that Europe is aiming for more strategic autonomy. This is important due to the threats we face, but also because the United States is increasingly aiming its satellite capability at Asia. And we do have the knowledge, the expertise, and the capabilities in Europe to do this. Take, for example, my country, the Netherlands. We have various knowledge institutions, companies, entrepreneurs that are world-class in particular areas. We work on different niche capabilities, such as specific ISR, space situational awareness, and intersatellite laser communication. And I know other EU countries have similar areas of expertise as well. The EU is at its best when it is able to work together and to extend a strong hand to capable partners. Together with our partners, we can strengthen our presence in space. But my key message today is that we need to adapt to the new reality. Given the security threats imposed by Russia and by China, we need to sharpen our agenda in 3 ways. First, we need to enable more capabilities for military use, as for example, Copernicus. This would mean that more data must be shared, also for military purposes. And in this respect, I would also like to mention the European Space Shield Initiative. In my view, ministries of defense of EU member states should be involved in the development of the Space Shield right from the start. The Netherlands is definitely ready to contribute and to play its part. Second, we need to invest more in space deterrence. In 2021, NATO recognized that attacks from the ground towards space and from or within space present a distinct challenge to the security of the alliance. This could lead to the invocation of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. And if we recognize that in this domain we can be attacked and ultimately Article 5 could be invoked, then we should also recognize that we need more capabilities for deterrence. And third, we need to improve our data policies around space. On the one hand, we should be more closed towards our adversaries. We don't have an open data policy in other military domains either, and that's for good reason. Our adversaries are watching, and we are now giving them a free show. But on the other hand, we need to share more data and more information among allies and friends. We need to aim for more collaboration within NATO and at the government level. And we also need to make EU capabilities directly available to armed forces within the EU and within NATO. Right now, even simple data cannot be shared on the same day, while same-day delivery is exactly what we need. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, we can see the turning points in space manifesting itself frequently. And therefore, we need to take a giant leap, because we don't want to send our soldiers into battle with their ears and their eyes partly covered. And that's what it will be like if we don't provide them with the data and with the tools they need to fight and to protect and to defend our nations. Developments in space should live up to the Spatium Liberum principle. But while we hope for the best, we also need to prepare for the worst. We need to be prepared to defend our security in space. Our way of life depends on it. So let's promote a peaceful and responsible use of space, but at the same time, let's prepare to defend our European interest and our European security in space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bijlmans, for sharing Netherlands' views. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will hold what I believe will be a very interesting conversation with Commissioner Kubilius that I will now call on stage, a conversation to be moderated by Mrs. Maria Tadeo, Europe correspondent of Le Grand Continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you so much. I was just thinking this time last year, there was a lot of speculation about whether or not there would be a defense commissioner and who the defense commissioner would be. Now, flash forward, you're here. There's a lot of questions in limited time, but there's been a question in this conference over the past 2 days, and Madame Kallas was very clear about that. Space has to be part of the defense package. But at the same time, the question for many is Europe, in some ways, was not able to guarantee its defense here on this planet, on planet Earth. The war showed that very clearly. How can you avoid that in space?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, really. And again, happy to see you today. Yesterday, we had some chance to talk, to speak. And I enjoyed after the conference, the whole day of bilateral meetings. Now I'm really much better prepared for space, whatever it means. Of course, obvious that defense and space are very close, related in between. And definitely, what we see from Ukraine, modern defense has a lot of, dependency on space data. We can look definitely into navigation, into positioning, how much it's important what Galileo can provide, both for civilian needs, but also for defense needs. We can look into Earth observation and, and definitely, surveillance, what is happening, and intelligence data, which we can get from space again, are crucial. And the last point, of course, is what we just started quite recently, development of secure satellite communication, IRIS². Again, that will be very much needed also for defense. So that's what I would call material side of relationship in between of defense and space. Definitely, we need to see both sides. There is space for defense, and there is a need of defense for space. That is very crucial. But also, we need to see, in some way, very interesting relationship in between of development of defense and space, where my first impression was when I started, all my preparation for this double portfolio, defense and space, I was really very much positively surprised how much Europe was managed to achieve in space with the best services of Galileo, of Copernicus, now IRIS², and how really defense could learn, and defense industry could learn from space, that in space we are able to develop and to implement big, highest quality, world-class quality projects, which we are a little bit missing in defense. So that was my first impression, that defense industry should learn from space industry. Second, what I see now, what is the relationship in defense and space? Of course, we understand, as you have said, we are not so good in defense on Earth. We see very clearly what are the threats. Now, I was speaking yesterday, as intelligence is saying, Russia can be ready to test us before 2030. That is why in defense, we're looking how we can catch up, how we can find additional funds, financial resources in order to invest. And I think that it can be also beneficial for space, because perhaps it could be more easy to raise additional funds for defense and to spend them also for space, where space is related very much with defense. And the last point, when I was speaking a lot, on defense, I was always saying that since the threats are so big ones, and the time when we can expect that those threats can materialize is quite short, so we need to move from what I was calling from incremental development of defense into big bang of development. Then I started to ask my people around, and we were discussing yesterday during the breakfast, what could be big bang in space? So that's, what I see really some kind of challenge to all of us to see what is next in space. And as I said, till now we were really leading in the world, and we need to be ready to lead, looking also into the future.
Well, thanks for that. Well, the Big Bang created the world, and maybe now there's a second one that's going to create the the constellation. But maybe perhaps on the detail, one of the themes that we have picked up from all of these companies is that they want to see from you, and I wonder if perhaps there's a direct response, that in space, they want to see that financing will be committed over the long term, but also they talk about the idea of European preference, the idea that you will work with European companies, and unlike defense at times on Earth, there's an instinct to immediately perhaps turn to the US or other jurisdictions because you need it now. Can you guarantee to them that there will be a form of European preference and the money behind it?
Well, definitely money will be. We are preparing now. We are starting still informally, but here will be also formal discussions on next MFF. And well, I am quite sure that especially in this circumstances, during this period of time, everybody in Commission and around will understand that defense and space is really a priority, which needs to have enough of financial resources. And of course, we can foresee very clearly that just for exploitation of those constellations which we established now in space, we need larger financial resources in next MFF than we have now. And of course, we need to look into also what new, which I would call big bang projects, we need to develop in space. Especially, I would look into intelligence data systems which can provide from space intelligence data for our security. That is what we call as observation governmental service. I think that it can be a little bit, the title could be changed into a little bit more clear title. And intelligence really is a crucial in our preparedness for whatever can come. That is what you can pick from President Niinistö report. That is what we need to do. On European, definitely, if we want to be secure, if we want to defend ourselves, we need to have our own capabilities. I am not, looking into some kind of, from protectionism point of view, I am looking from security point of view. We need to have our autonomous capabilities. We need to have our own capabilities in order really to be secure and to be ready for whatever can come.
That's a very interesting point where you say it's not protectionism, the fact that we say it has to be Europe. It's just as very delicate as the sovereignty of a country. But I can think of at least one member state, there has been reports that is in conversations with Starlink, which belongs to Elon Musk. For a lot of these companies, let alone the political world, for a lot of these companies, that absolutely makes no sense because it contradicts the idea of strategic autonomy and European preference. Do you still believe in this concept of strategic autonomy? What does it mean for you? And I know you're working on a paper. How are the many different opinions around strategic autonomy going to come together in this?
Well, I would not elaborate on any country. Everybody is free to decide what they want. We are not, we have no power, to push anybody. But from security point of view, I'm always saying that we need to be quite clear in our understanding what are the challenges. So, and in my view, there are two time frames when we're talking about challenges. One is urgent challenge, which we are relating with Russia, and we need to be ready, really. My mission letter starts from request during 100 days to prepare so-called white paper on European defense. And in description of what should be written into that white paper, there is very clear language that white paper should define the measures which we need to implement in order for us to be ready for most extreme military contingencies, which means that, we should be ready for possibility of real military aggression. Second challenge, longer-term challenge, which I relate with developments on Southeast Asia, Chinese rising military power, which perhaps will demand more of American attention, more of American mitigation efforts. That will demand from them, to push their resources into that direction, and perhaps that we need to prepare ourselves that Americans will diminish their presence on European soil.
You think that's possible?
I think that that's possible, and that is why we need to look into our autonomous capabilities. That will not be that we are becoming, how to say, not friendly with Americans and so on. We shall see things are, developing in different ways, but nevertheless, that will be not the reason that we are becoming, how to say, that this will be simply the way how things can develop in the global geopolitical environment.
And since you mentioned, of course, the US and how Europe should be ready, you also have to talk about NATO because it's a huge umbrella of protection for Europe. The question of goals and targets, there's been a number of announcements. Lithuania came out and said, we think for the next 5 years, we aim for 5 to 6% GDP defense expenditure. That's a lot of money. Estonia came out with a similar number. The Polish have spent a lot of money in the past 3 years. As defense commissioner, the EU, of course, would you be okay and happy, let's say, if by the NATO summit, that sort of 2% goal gets moving to 3, 4, even 5. Some argue that's too much, but definitely 3 or 4, that's the realistic scenario.
I'm always, I would say joking that my portfolio and my responsibility is to spend the money, not to raise the money. I am ready to spend whatever, 6%, 7%, it will be, we shall find how to spend them. But if to speak more seriously, well, I know my own country, Lithuania, why there was a decision, to raise defense spending up to 5 or 6%. It's not that, President Trump is demanding and so on 5%. The reason is totally different. Our experts in Lithuania, quite recently, last October, they made so-called, war game simulation together with some American NATO generals and also using United States, companies' IT software. How those, simulations are done. And the question which was put on the table was very simple. Let's imagine that Russia is testing us, Lithuania, in 2028. We have the resources which we have now. Russia is coming with quite a big force. What will be, will we be able to defend ourselves for the first 10 days when we're expecting that NATO will come after that? The answer was no, after all those simulations. And then, another question was what we need to have in order to defend ourselves. The answer was yes, we can defend ourselves, but additionally, we need to spend 10 billion euros till 28 to procure, additional equipment and so on, which means that we need to raise our defense spending from 3%, what we are doing now, up to 5 or 6%.
And is that the message that, forget about NATO and Trump, because a lot of the discourse at times is, oh, but it's because Trump is making you do this. You're given the example of Lithuania, you say it's not Trump, it's because we thought we have to do it. Is that what you're sending also to the rest of member states, that really prepared to operate in a world where it's going to be between 3 and 5? And it's not because Trump, it's because you have to.
I'm always saying very simply, no, it's not. Sorry. Oh. Yeah.
This is a white paper.
Yeah, white paper, yeah.
That's I have the exclusive.
It will be better with the real white paper. But if to answer your question, I'm always saying that we need to raise our defense spending not because of Trump, but because of Putin, what Putin is doing. And that's our clear understanding. And well, of course, that is for NATO to decide. We have very good relationship and conversations with NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte. And I'm pretty sure that during NATO summit in June in Hague, there will be a decision to raise this, the criteria for defense spending, at least up to 3% or even maybe a little bit more.
Even north of 3. And your team, they say you're very busy, and I'm sure you are, and you have to go. But I want to ask you just a final question, because I think it's important. Obviously, the conference looks at space, but I wonder, you said, and you just repeated again, the biggest challenge right now for Europe is the war that's been waged by Russia on Ukraine. The president of the US, even President Zelensky also concedes this. They believe the war is in some ways going to end this year. The question is, how? As defense commissioner, I'm sure that everything that you do, you also look at through the prism of what happens in Ukraine. What is for you the best scenario, but also the scenario as you see things now that is going to manifest? Those are two different things, the things that you want and the things that you think is likely. How do you see this ending in 2025, if that's the case?
Well, definitely both Ukrainians deserve, and we want peace to come to this country. But we are talking, and Ukrainians are talking, and we are talking about peace through strength. That's our vision, and that's what we need to achieve. The question is that strength on Ukrainian side enough for achieving such kind of peace through strength, or is not enough? As I understand, we agree that for time being, such kind of strength is not enough, what Ukrainians have. Then second question, Ukrainians by themselves, they're doing everything what they can do. So additional strength to Ukraine for peace through strength can come only from our side, from Western side, from EU, from United States. And that is why we need to really deliver what is needed for peace through strength to be achieved. If peace will come under Putin's conditions, if we shall fail with this formula peace through strength, then perhaps we need to be ready that threats to us will become even bigger ones. When we're talking about, preparedness for most extreme military contingencies, and when intelligence are speaking about, possibilities that Russia will test us before 2030, in that case, if we shall fail with Ukraine, we need to be ready for, much more, radical threats to us. So that's my position. That's my point of view. And I see that when we are talking, both with Ukrainians and with, European experts, this is a very common view how things are looking now.
The worst possible. And just lastly, you said the long-term challenge could be perhaps different to the short term, also connected. Some look at the idea of China, a China that becomes maybe belligerent in the future. Certainly this week, we've seen incredible artificial intelligence breakthroughs. I mean, it's clear they're putting money and people to work, and they're aiming to become not just a second power, but perhaps even one day the biggest power. Is that something that will feature not just in your white paper, but also in the way that you think Europe should be structured? Like, it's not just Russia. You're looking at a much bigger threat in the future, and it's in the form of China.
Well, even now we need to see, much broader picture, because Russia is not alone. We can see this axis of aggressive authoritarians really operating in Ukraine, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Somebody saying that China is not far away from that. So that is how things are looking now. Well, I cannot predict what will happen with China. Really, they are doing good in some technological developments. We need to compete with them, even in space, artificial intelligence and so on. But of course, we need to see also that they are strengthening their military capabilities. And if to read American experts, they are really worried about that quite strongly. And that is what we need to take into account when we are looking into longer term perspective. And from that point of view, first of all, what I was saying, we need to predict, we need to have in mind that perhaps Americans will shift much more of their attention toward China. We shall be together with them as with partners, but again, we need to understand that in that case, in Europe, we shall need to take much more of responsibility on our own safety, taking into account that Americans perhaps will diminish their presence.
It's our security. Well, sir, thank you very much, Commissioner. Of course, it was a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully next year we'll see you again.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Kubilius, for that all-important conversation, and also to set the tone for this afternoon. And thank you also to our distinguished guests earlier on, HRVP Kallas and Minister Breckelmans, for their opening remarks. And indeed, as we see some of you just leaving for the other sessions taking place in the venue, in the Silver Hall and Agora, we are now ready for launch for the session on Shared Frontiers, exploring the intersection of space and defense.